you don't get to look at that one little piece of metadata. You now have to look across a whole set of resources.
If you're not careful, especially at hyperscale, I think there's the potential here for cost of data engineering to kind of get a little bit out of control.
This is an expensive problem.
You don't necessarily have to create this sprawl of systems as well as these complex ETL processes just to achieve the performance.
You can get a hyper bill.
That's right. Hello and welcome. I'm Chris Gladwin, CEO and co-founder here at Ocient, a hyperscale data solutions company. And welcome to another edition of Big Bytes with Ocient, where we sit down and enjoy a drink or snack with some of the smartest minds with the biggest brains thinking about the world's largest data sets. Today, we're talking about managing costs at hyperscale, which is really another way of saying we're talking about hyperscale again, because scale is what creates the cost. And almost every company that handles petabytes of data wants to innovate with their data, but they always deal with this cost issue. It's such a delicate balance between investing to optimize and protecting the data, while also understanding that no CFO is going to write a blank check, especially with hyperscale kind of numbers. We have three great guests today, including Mike Ferguson, who is Managing Director of Intelligent Business Strategies, Eric Berger, who is the former CTO of the FCC, which made a lot of the cool stuff we're now starting to use, current research professor at Virginia Tech. And we're also joined by Ocient's Senior Director of Customer Solutions, Shantan Kethireddy. Mike, welcome. What are you drinking today?
Thank you. Well, being a Brit, of course, you would be very surprised if I wasn't drinking tea. So tea and, of course, with my slogan on the back from Robert the Bruce up in Scotland, if at first you don't succeed, try again.
I didn't realize that was Robert the Bruce. That's pretty cool. How about you, Eric? What are you drinking today?
Actually, I've got well water. Since it is in the morning. We could mix other things with this later in the afternoon.
Virginia's finest or Maryland's finest well water?
Yeah, Virginia's finest. There we go.
Virginia is for lovers.
How about you, Shantan?
So I'm drinking a not so good cup of pumpkin spice coffee, but I'm double fisting. I got my giant jug of water. My doctor says I need to drink more water.
Doctor, give me the news.
Well, I'm having some coffee. I'm like cold brew in the summer. I like the chameleon cold brew. It's like double the strength, double the flavor.
Double fresh, double smooth, double delicious to chew.
And then I've got some nut milks in here. So first I've got a macadamia nut milk, which is just like macadamia nuts and water in a blender, which is just like nothing but wonderful fat, and a little bit of hemp seed for a little flavor. Really good. That's what I drink every morning. All right, so let's jump in. Eric, help us understand the problem. And as I said, you were a part of creating this problem in a wonderful way at the FCC. Everybody talks about how amazing 5G is, but one of the things it does is because it's moving so much more data, it creates something like at least 20 times the metadata.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And it's a thing that we actually did recognize, over 5 years ago, was that, 5G would be generating lots of data. And it's not just the old data. I mean, there is so much, that can be gleaned from like telephone records. But with 5G, it really is that connection of the Internet of Things. And so now we're not just seeing that, you call me, I call you, but look,
right,
we all are on video.
Video killed the radio star. Video killed the radio star.
The metadata is even different, which makes a real challenge for analysis and a real challenge because you don't get to look at that one little piece of metadata. You now have to look across a whole set of resources. And that's one of the reasons the government got involved, because, we recognized that, bad actors could also start looking at some of this. And so that's where a number of the regulations we see today around like consumer privacy and requirements for networks to basically know what's going on in their network. And, with, as you said, with all this data flying around, it's not trivial. to understand just what's going on in your own network.
So there's two accelerating curves. One is just the speed means that more things are happening. So there's more metadata. And now you're not just connecting people, you're connecting light bulbs and buildings and phones and digital insects and probes and drones. And they're all doing stuff, which creates metadata. So Mike, this is an expensive problem, right? I mean, today executives are really trying to build these better customer experiences while making them efficient enough to be practical. What are you hearing from executives trying to work with, these petabytes and, soon to be exabytes of data, while being financially responsible?
I think they're eager in the terms of data and analytics, because I think they really regard it now as strategic, and but at the same time, so I think in that sense, data and analytics has got to be about widening margins, and focused on outcomes. But at the same time, I think they're concerned about complexity, about the sheer volume of data scattered across so many places.
Yeah.
And also the costs of moving it around. And I think increasingly as well, with more and more people getting involved in, I think pretty well demand from all around the business to get at data. There's so many more people trying to pull it together and clean it up or integrate it and prepare it and analyze it and all that kind of thing. They're very concerned about costs around that, because I think what they feel is they're blind to it. They just don't have any easy way of understanding the whole thing from end to end. They quite clearly are eager to invest because they definitely see the value and want to do that, especially since the pandemic. They've become very, very customer focused. Because a lot of companies had to go online pretty rapidly to survive during the pandemic, and coming out of that, I think it's made them far more customer conscious. But now, in order to understand customers, it's not just, who are your customers? It's like everything they do, all their online behavior. If they're buying products that have got IoT devices in, I want all that data. I want opinion data. I want everything. And so pulling together a much larger set of data from a larger number of places, plus a number of data sources just exploding. So I think there's concern, but I think that's what I would say, and to some extent frustration, because some of those concerns are holding them back, but they're really eager to try and make this work.
Often what will happen in IT stuff, the pace of the increase, going faster, more data, is going at the pace of Moore's law. So usually what that means is the price kind of stays the same, because if you have to analyze twice as much stuff in 2 years, well, that's fine because the price is half. And so it's fixed. But every once in a while you have these jumps like 5G where it's going to, it's kind of been going along at that rate. Then all of a sudden, boom, everything 5X's, and it's going to be a challenge because the demand is not going to go, the costs are not going to go at the rate of Moore's law. You're going to have this step function. And you see that in security in particular. You're seeing that, I think, Eric, because you do a lot of stuff in the cybersecurity world, is as enterprises are investing in data analytics, you're making the case that cybersecurity and the use of how to secure data at hyperscale is going to be a real challenge. How do you see, companies thinking about that when they're thinking about the analysis of data from a security point of view as it's going through this giant step function?
That's a great question. And actually, quite often I see enterprises not thinking about it.
Bueller.
Yeah. Until their board's audit committee, which is quite often where cyber rolls up. Oh my goodness, we got to, and then it becomes, we've got to go spend money to protect.
If you're the IT person, you don't want your, initiation of project to occur at the audit committee at the board. That's bad.
None of these executives want the brand damage associated with any kind of data breach.
Yeah.
The loss of customer confidence, all of that goes with it, and all the other consequences that can go with that. It's just a no-no, which also, by the way, is driving up the interest in governance of all the data. But obviously, the more data there is, the harder that becomes. Again, the whole issue around costs associated with that, complexity associated with that, it's all there. But I absolutely agree with Eric. The whole cybersecurity thing is pretty high on almost every agenda in every organization.
Shantan, you talk to these kind of folks every day, and I'm curious, like, what are you seeing? What are organizations, what are executives doing? How are they dealing with this explosion of scale and metadata that they have to analyze?
With this explosion of data, there's this challenge, right? I have to now be able to analyze this massive amount of data. I need to do it performantly. So what I'm seeing are a couple patterns. Number one is you got all these lines of businesses that are scrambling and they're defaulting to leveraging the solutions that they have on the floor or whatever is available, whether it's right or not, right? It's there. They know it may not have the IOPS, but it's there. And for these massive scale data sets, the data could be structured, but most regularly the data is totally semi-structured, JSON, Avro, Parquet, and so on. So I see even worse, business units have this mix of NoSQL systems, Hadoop systems, relational systems for each different workload, but that data typically and logically belongs together. And the third thing is now you have people that also want copies of that data. For example, their data science divisions, so that they could do their own analysis, but you can't copy hyperscale data everywhere. So now they're spreading this data around the organization. And what that means is a proliferation of copies and data sets, which, of course, is not very performant. You get a bunch of latency. It's not cost effective, but as Eric pointed out, it really exposes the business to higher liability of data breach. What I see customers are asking for are really like 3 or 4 different things. They want an end-to-end solution so they don't have to invest in separate ETL tools and the database and the managed service. They want to consolidate. And what that means is they want to put mixed orthogonal workloads, a mix of semi-structured, structured data. You may have batch and high importance workloads all in the same place, a mix of business users. And they really want a solution that can support the IOPS that they need for these massive data sets and a database that can handle the massive in-flight data sets. And then the last thing is, they want a customer solutions model where, when they talk about ROI for replatforming, they talk in years, right? And really the business is saying, if you want to replatform, you need an ROI in months. Right. So you really need a partner, customer solutions to help with that.
Are there certain verticals where the problem is more acute, or there's something going on right now causing them to really have to think about this?
Oh yeah, I mean, obviously, financial services are super nervous about any kind of cybersecurity related issue. Any kind of financial services organization is almost like instant brand damage. I mean, it's a no brainer. They just can't not. It has to be no. Can't have it, must be rock solid. I think obviously as well, you're definitely seeing other verticals, government of course, same call, they also very, very cybersecurity focused, ad tech, telco.
I was going to say, whenever I speak about hyperscale data, I always challenge the audience to think of something where the new version of it makes less data than the old version. And so far, no one has met the challenge because everything else is the opposite. Whether it's a toothbrush, an airplane, a building, a light bulb, the new version will make more data than the old version. And there's just, as IT professionals, like, you don't get to say no. Like, you just have to figure out at your organization how to deal with it.
Loading is clearly a challenge, right? Especially when you're talking about loading of data that is coming from disparate sources, and it can be semi-structured and could be JSON and Parquet and Avro, right? You need to be able to load it. But I think a consequence of that, as well as the hyperscale data, is that going back to this whole ETL concept, you have people that have stood up these ETL repositories where they're doing a lot of this, pre-aggregation. I'm working with 3 or 4 customers. I'd be interested in hearing Eric and Mike and their experiences, but we're working with several customers right now where they've created a bunch of cubes and aggregated data simply because they want to get more performance at hyperscale in their existing systems. And the challenge is simply that those systems need to be cared and fed, and you have test, dev, UAT, prod for those ELT systems. And really what we're doing and the approach we're taking is, if you have a hyperscale database that's capable of handling the IOPS and things like that, you can often work against the log level, right? You can work against the ground truth data. And where you can't, you could service that through intra-database ELT, and those things can be used to create data marts and data sharing. An interesting case that we're working with right now is data scientists. A lot of times they don't know if their hypothesis is right. So in order to figure out which data they need, they have to do a bunch of ad hoc analysis. Yep. And that's stuff that we are espousing that you could service through ELT in the database, do a bunch of hypothesis analysis, create these data marts. And in our system, if you want to do ML against that, you could do it in the database. But if you really want to use our Python driver or Spark generic driver, whatever it is, you can use Jupyter and other platforms in order to do that. But the point is that you don't necessarily have to create this sprawl of systems as well as these complex ETL processes just to achieve the performance.
You could very easily get this to spiral out of control if you're not careful, especially at hyperscale. You can't, you're gonna start hitting ceilings pretty quickly here, and CFOs could potentially get a hell of a shock at the end of the month whenever the invoice comes in. If you're not careful, especially at hyperscale, there's I think there's the potential here for cost of data engineering to kind of get a little bit out of control. It's really obviously going to matter that people are able to analyze data at that scale, but at the same time, they've got to do it within an acceptable budget. I think the problem right now is it's not visible because there's so many tools scattered all over the place. I don't think the cost is visible.
One of the wonderful things about usage-based pricing is it's great for, smaller workloads or elastic workloads, but you have usage-based pricing at hyperscale and you can have a problem moment at the end of the month.
You can get a hyper bill.
That's right. That's well put. And that's a good closing thought. So with that, let's wrap it up. I feel like we've kind of done our job in, creating some interest for future discussion because there's a lot more to talk about here. But that's all the time we have for today. So thank you, Eric and Mike and Shantan, for joining us on Big Bytes with Ocient. And we'll talk to y'all later.